Welcome everyone to this week's special edition of the Education Showroom podcast. And we're delighted to have Martin Saunders, as you can see from his title there on his screen, Chief Exec at EdShed. Martin, welcome to the showroom. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Really good. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us for this week's episode. And ladies and gentlemen, you're dialing in because you're clearly looking for some inspiration, some background, some ideas, some thoughts around the following title. So, how can yourselves as teachers and school and multi-academy trust leaders turbocharge your students? Three things: engagement, enjoyment, and love for maths. So the formal title of this week's podcast is How Can Teachers and Senior Leaders Turbocharge Their Students' Engagement, Enjoyment, and Love for Maths? Martin, let's learn a little bit about yourself to start off with. It'd be lovely for your audience today to know a little bit about Martin Saunders. So yeah, if you'd like to set the scene a little bit, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Martin Saunders. I'm CEO, co-founder of EdShed. Before that, I was a primary school teacher. Before that, I worked in tech. I've done all sorts of different various jobs, which, sort of feeds into, I suppose, your view of how the world works and how people work. When you make products, I've made mobile games, for example, and so the educational mobile games that we have, they come from a commercial background, but also an education background. I think it's important to bring that kind of richness together, and hopefully, that enables me to do my job. But as I say, I was sort of a primary school teacher, and EdShed came from, being a primary school teacher, thinking there are things which, I wish we could do a bit better. But having the experience sort of before that, put two and two together, and then accidentally made this thing that went a bit crazy. So, and here we are, basically.
That's great. It's a great story. And I totally agree with you. That classroom experience, designing tech, which directly influences the child's performance and enthusiasm, and everything we're here to talk about today is so vitally important. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hear later on in the podcast from Martin about the impact of EdShed. But if you haven't heard of EdShed, or you've heard about them and go, it's been a while, or I wonder what they do, just in 60 seconds-ish, Martin, just what is EdShed for your listeners today?
Right, so EdShed is a platform that has a series of products that focus around kind of core skills for primary age children and classrooms. We're classroom focused, and all our products effectively are a combination of teaching resources and then tech, which is a tool to help deliver content, give practice in the form of games or support assessment. But we're very much, I like to say that in EdTech, the ed comes before the tech. And that's how we see things. We're an education company. We just happen to use some tech.
Yeah, well put. Excellent. The first, let's say, semi-formal question for today's discussion and debate, Martin, is really around learners finding maths really challenging. I'm going to use the word that they could be disengaged. They find it very hard, frustrated. They may have high levels of anxiety, perhaps when it comes to mathematics. But the word I'm going to focus on for the time being is those learners that are disengaged when it comes to maths. Why do you think this may be the case in your experience?
Okay, I suppose the thing is, if you anything you learn, you learn something, your brain rewires itself. That takes sugar, energy, and there's a physical change in your brain. And as sort of as biology works, that's sort of conservative operation. So your brain will only do that if it sees a reason. And the only reason that you would bother doing that is if you feel you can be successful. And I think that's where the fundamental thing with this is, where children don't believe that they can succeed with this thing, and so they protect themselves from the sort of the shame and the failure. And then why would you bother? I'm going to fail. Why would I put all this effort in for no reason? I'm going to do something else. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to, which does become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that's the challenge. And I think the classrooms that have children who are super engaged in maths, they all go in knowing that they can achieve whatever it is that's in front of them. And I think you can talk about like resilience, and I think that's sort of a bit of a a wrong angle at the right thing, if that makes sense. I don't think it's about children being able to fail and get back up again. I think it's them sincerely believing that actually success is on their kind of personal roadmap, and I think with you sort of work on that basis, I think you go into any subject where you're not in fear of failure, you relax and you just get on with it, and then actually you do it and you do succeed because you've bothered to try. And I think that's that fundamental thing of like, right, we can do this, and as a teacher being, I think there's lots of adults with maths anxiety, lots of, primary school teachers who teach maths every day and they're still a bit anxious of maths. And I think that's that kind of like, actually we're all mathematicians. We all do it all the time. And getting across this whole, like, actually we're perfectly capable. We can all do this stuff, and then like, right, I can feel successful. And then you get, the dopamine hit, I suppose, that comes when like in game, we talked about mobile games, if you get a little ding when you get a point and something goes right, and it feels great. You go, yeah, I did something, and you want them to feel like they can earn that. And then when it's authentic and they do actually get that, like, I got that right, that was actually hard. I actually worked it out and I got it right. That's the self-fulfilling prophecy that you want.
Interesting. And I think, just showing personal experience long time ago when I was in education, I can assure you of that, hence the short and grey hair. I think that one of the things I think that stood out to me or stands out to me is that in my head there was a psychological block between what I was learning in mathematics in the classroom and what I would actually have to apply in the real world setting. What's your thoughts about that? How could a teacher kind of, as you just said, help the child get over that challenging thought process and say, well, this is how it would apply in real life. This is when what does that look like to you?
I think the temptation is to think, I think we'll get asked that question, why do I need to learn fractions for? And if you're 10 years old or whatever, I mean, I think the temptation as an adult is to say, oh, well, you could be working out your shopping, or you could be cutting a piece of wood and you need to use an angle or whatever. For a child, that's not still particularly relevant, because that's not something that they're going to do because they're a child. But I think making it, I mean, one thing that I fundamentally believe as a teacher and in our products and in the classroom is that learning has inherent value. And I think the value of learning fractions is that you learn fractions. This stuff is interesting and neat and empowering because you can use it, and you're bigger as a person because you got it. And I think trying to excuse the learning, well, I'm sorry you've got to learn this, but it would be useful if you were a carpenter or whatever. I just think what that reflects is actually what you're saying in the subtext is this thing doesn't have inherent value. And I think that's wrong, because actually the maths and mathematics is how you describe how everything works, and understanding that gives you so much power, and the ability to take a puzzle. It's just, I mean, if you look at maths as a load of puzzles, we do Sudoku, we do crosswords, we do Candy Crush, we do whatever, puzzles in all sorts of contexts, and we do it because it's fun. Why should maths be any different?
Yeah, well said, well put. Let's just flick it around a little bit. From what you see, what you hear, what you've experienced as a classroom teacher, and again, specifically in that key area we're talking about today about learners' engagement, students and their learners' engagement. What have you seen, done here as the chief exec? What are school and mat leaders trying to do to actually turbocharge the learners' engagement in the areas of mathematics? What are they trying to do, or are doing, successfully doing, or perhaps trying, but unfortunately unsuccessfully doing?
Okay. As I said before, I think focusing on kind of enabling but not just success, but a belief in success, I think is kind of where it starts. And so there's some specific things. So there's, so when I trained as a math specialist, and it was kind of Singapore maths was the thing, and we went, and I remember as a trainee going into demonstration lessons for sort of where there was Shanghai maths and all that sort of stuff. And one of the ideas that came in was I think it was a Dong Nao Jing, which is we're opening up the problem and we're going to show you the thing that we will later solve. And I think actually there's a fundamental problem with that, which is that if you show something which kids can't do, they go, oh, I can't do this. And then the whole rest of the lesson, what they remember is, well, I couldn't do it. So I'm not going to do this thing because I failed it before I've started. And I think what a much better way of doing that is to start with kind of take your context, go, right, let's remind ourselves what we did last time. So say talks about fractions, you're doing fractions. Last time we did adding fractions with the same denominator. So we've done, 1/4 add 2/4 is 3/4. Let's have adding fractions with denominators that have multiples. So quarters and halves. So then you have, if you start from where what we could do, and then all we're doing is add one little step. So I think introducing a concept in relation to existing knowledge that you've sort of activated, I think is a much better way to sort of open the box in a successful way. So we're saying, all right, we know this stuff. We did this. Let's just remind ourselves because we might have forgotten, we've slept and all the rest of it. So here's what we did last time, little recap. And now we're just going to do this as well. And then you kind of get the, oh yeah, that makes sense, And if it doesn't, well, you can focus on the little gap. And then now you've got a sort of a belief in, all right, well, it's not actually that hard. I understand. Now let's dig into a bit. They're doing it on the basis that they know they can succeed because they already have. Bit of support, bit of, sort of prior activation and all that. But starting a lesson in terms of activating and connecting to prior learning, I think is a really powerful thing. And I suppose it comes down, my sort of, you realize you've got a philosophy of education. My philosophy of education is that learning is the connection as much as the thing. And so I think teaching the connection is a better focus. They'll get the step. You just got to sort of go take a step from somewhere. You don't take a step into thin air, do you? You go from somewhere. So that's the thing. Another thing which I think cuts across lots of subjects, anything with broad, often abstract knowledge, like phonics is a good example as well. Having that structured, systematic and explicit approach to the curriculum. And so the way you progress through learning, making it clear what you're trying to learn. And I don't mean like writing down the LO, I can, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's important to know what you're trying to do and how the kind of subject knowledge is structured. That's the important thing, knowing that we do this and we do this and we do this and we do this, and the kind of the concepts are connected in a certain way, takes the mystery away. And again, if you think about children being comfortable to take the risk to try, that comes from partly scoping the problem is part of the deal. You look at something and as an adult, you think, I'm in my house, I'm going to do a DIY job or whatever. I look at it and, I need to, before I drill a hole in something, I kind of want to know that I can get to the end of this problem. And I think kids are the same. And, it's the same with learning. You need to kind of make it explicit. What are we trying to achieve? And then they can measure their success. And again, I think lip service in terms of success criteria and writing an LO and whatever, I think it's trying to do the right thing, but that in itself isn't the important bit. The important bit is that kids understand and have ownership of their own learning.
Interesting. Just one of the things I want to just pick up on there, when going back to your classroom experience, which I'm fascinated by. How, when you were designing a maths lesson, Martin, what kind of things would you do in addition to what you've just spoken about excellently there to make it exciting? So if I was to roll back 40 years of my life and being in your primary school maths class, what types of things did you do, or would you recommend to create that excitement? I was just one of those children that if my eyes opened that extra little millimeter, I'd want to try harder. I would try harder, and math didn't come naturally to me. What did you do to try and boost that engagement and that, I can do this, and I have just done this moment? What did that look like?
Yeah, I suppose the best analogy I've come with is a bit like fishing, where you let them out and you reel them in, and you let them out and you reel them in, and it's that allowing for there to be surprises and neat little patterns. And it's things like, if you get sort of academically about it, things like variation theory, where you have a series of questions that you've designed to expose a particular concept. And then as you come to it, you go, and they get to question 5 or whatever, and you go, oh, but it's the same number but there's a 0, and it's the same with a 0. Or, if you're kind of doing, I don't know, times table and then add a power of 10, so 4 times 4 or 4 times 40, those sorts of things where you're using kind of the substructure of maths to inform the questioning. And then the way lots of back and forth. I think, lots of sit quietly and do 100 questions. Everyone gets disengaged, and there's a time and a place for practice. But I think short and sharp, being intentional about what are we trying to do. And so the general pattern that I like to follow, I suppose, is you have everybody together, talk about the concept, make sure everyone's happy with it. Then groups where you maybe kind of can support each other, and some kind of helpful, productive talk, which needs a positive classroom culture, so they're not just chatting about what they did at the weekend or fortnight or whatever else, but they can be engaged. And I think that again works from, you want them to be excited to find the answer because they believe they can. But it's pitch is the hard bit, because obviously you've got to know your kids, and what lesson, how you teach a lesson with one group might be different to another. And to be fair, I mean, some of the best sort of in between stopping being a regular teacher and running EdShed, I was chair of governors at a primary school for about 12 years, and I volunteered in a year 2 classroom just doing little interventions and stuff. And so we'd often have a little group for maths. I'd never know who was going to be in it. I'd never know what we were covering. And I'd pretty much just make it up on the spot. And it was either, generally, stereotypically, the kids who were at the bottom or the kids who were at the top, because I was either pre-teaching or reteaching, or I was sort of stretching. But I never really knew what. And actually, I sort of watched myself, I suppose, where I'd be, okay, what are we trying to do? Let's try and work out where we're starting from. And then I'd hit a snag or spot a misconception and go, right, let's zero in on that. Things like, I don't know, crossing 0 or crossing 10, and those sorts of common sticky points that kids get, and then kind of iterate from there, but very back and forth and very kind of iterative. And obviously the bigger the group is, the harder it is to do that, because different kids are going to have different needs. But that's part of the art of teaching, I suppose, is being able to differentiate on the fly. And that comes down to teacher confidence. I could do that partly because I had a small group, but also because I went into such depth as a math specialist. I was good at maths, got good grades in maths A level and stuff. And so I was confident as a teacher that if we went off tangent, that was all right. I could do the other thing and respond to the needs, and I suppose the problem is, if you don't do that, that's where you get the disengagement, where a kid just gets confused about something. And then you don't sort of get them back on track quickly enough. And then they're like, well, I can't do this. Let's look out the window instead. Let's be silly. Let's throw him a pencil, or let's annoy somebody. And so I can't do it, And so it's a really difficult juggle, because you've got 30 kids in front of you, and knowing who's stuck where. But again, getting the substructure right. If you simplify things for yourself, because you have those, you have explicit steps for you in terms of, there's a process, there's 5 steps. Let's make sure we've all got 1, we've all got 2, we've all got 3, we've all got 4, all got 5. Off we go. Going into your groups, all right, a few of us are stuck on this step. Sometimes you bring it back in, sometimes you go, right, if you're stuck on question 3, come over here, and that sort of thing. It makes the classroom quite dynamic. And again, it's hard to manage, because you've got to be so responsive to the kids, and that means you've got to know your stuff really well, really well.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Really, really interesting indeed. Sorry to take you back to your classroom days all of those years ago, but I enjoyed learning. I enjoyed learning that question. I'd love for the audience to learn about EdShed. So if you could tell us a little bit about how the impact of EdShed is, I mean, obviously it's a huge name. I've known it for many, many years. I'm sure lots and lots of listeners today will be hearing it. But for those that aren't, tell us a little bit about, what the fundamentals of what it does, the progress, the impact it helps teachers and students in schools.
Okay, so yeah, so we've got a series of products within EdShed. Spelling Shed was our original product. Math Shed shortly after. We've got a phonics product. You'll
Yeah.
be surprised to hear it's called Phonics Shed. We're soon to be releasing a computing product called, you guessed it, Computing Shed. We've got Literacy Shed as well, which is reading and writing resources. For this conversation, obviously, Math Shed is the sort of the focus product, I suppose, and what that does in relation to what we've talked about, I suppose, a few different things. One thing I suppose we've got in the product is the way that we follow White Rose in terms of the progression. We have teaching content, PowerPoints, which kind of have everything set out, and obviously you can adapt them if you need to. But what it should do to support teachers and classrooms is, one, give that connected introduction, which is, opening the box in a successful way, and then really, really detailed, hopefully well thought through modeling in terms of pictorial representations, and are we using a number line, and are we using a 10 frame, and we're, it's quite sort of intentionally thought through that they see lots of different representations, lots of conceptual and procedural variation, lots of explicit small steps within each concept and all that sort of stuff, all kind of pre-worked out and sort of laid out. So, in terms of like drawing out all those modeling bits is really very time consuming. So you try and sort of, get it out on a whiteboard on the fly is quite hard to be clear and think through the kind of, where are we trying to get to? How do we work back to how we represent that, and introducing models at an appropriate time, so when they actually need it, they kind of have an understanding of, the sense of scale that a number line gives you. But actually there's a concept of a number line that you have to learn in there. The other thing which I think is really important, which we haven't really talked about in terms of maths in general and maths confidence, is I can't understate the value of fluency in addition and multiplication, so number bonds and times tables. And in our platform we have online games which just support and reward practice for being able to do those. So recognizing number bonds to 20, recognizing times tables within 12, and associated facts. So as I sort of mentioned, like 6 times 8, 6 times 80, 6 times 0.8, there's a connection between them, and being able to kind of put some practice in. You, with anything you do, you learn a concept. In terms of committing it to long-term memory, you've got to use it. If you don't use that skill, why would your brain bother wasting resource to commit it and integrate it unless you put some time and effort in? And so as much as you want to have a clever strategy to do everything, sometimes hard work is the strategy. But actually for kids, it shouldn't feel like hard work. It should be time spent that they're engaged and motivated. And putting it in a game format is how we achieve that.
Thank you very much, Martin. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love for you to check out EdShed. I would love for you to contact Martin, pick up on any of these conversations, continue where we left off today. If you'd like to have a look at EdShed, a trial, how is it working in schools? What does setup look like? How do children respond? How much progress do they make? How much, positivity, again, in correlation to today's discussion, enthusiasm, helping them want to learn, motivating them, breaking down those barriers. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd strongly recommend you get in touch with Martin. Martin, on that note, how can people get in contact with you? What's your website, please, if you could remind me, and your contact details, please?
Okay, yeah, so our website is www.edshed.com. It's EDSHED.com. If you wanted to have a go at some of the products, there's a 30-day free trial that you can just go and self-serve. We offer free walkthroughs, so the support team will happily do that. Or existing customers who are like, I didn't know you had this, which is quite often. We've got tons of stuff in the product. We just contact the support team at support@edshed.com. And set up demos. Specific questions about sort of what I've said on me, my very uncomplicated email is martin@edshed.com. So you can drop me a line.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Listeners, thank you for dialing in to this week's podcast. Martin, it's been a pleasure to have you join us. Thank you very much indeed. And ladies and gentlemen, check out EdShed. Thank you, everybody.